Were you with a toxic person that was more subtle, that was harder for you to be able to identify, was harder for other people to realize what is actually going on? Maybe you were with someone that didn't seem so grandiose and didn't seem so out there of like, hey, yelling and screaming. Maybe they were more shy. Maybe they're more quiet. Maybe they're more covert. See, a lot of times when we talk about narcissism, people normally have in their mind what narcissism is. Like the person snapping selfies or blowing up on social media or different things like that. People normally have in their eye an idea of what it might be. And the problem is so many people have that concept in their mind. They're like, I'm not with a narcissist. I'm just with, someone who's struggling with something or someone who's really shy or someone that doesn't want to communicate with me. And they start downplaying and minimizing the abuse that's actually happening in their life. Well, you never know. You might be involved with someone who is toxic, but not be able to know what's going on. It could be that you'd be dealing with a covert narcissist. Could be that you're dealing with a vulnerable narcissist. We're going to touch on that a little bit today. I've done a couple of videos on covert narcissism, and if you haven't watched that, check those out. Even ones where I try to compare both of them, overt and covert, just to give you an idea. But I want to step into just a little bit, dive into the world of vulnerable narcissists. Okay, it's very similar, so it's hard to be able to say like, oh, like wow, it's like so different. It's very similar in a lot of different ways, but I think there's a couple nuances that I want to pull out just from my own perspective and just from stuff that I've looked up and read and researched some of like understanding some of it. So I want to come up with like 6 points that I'm talking to you about today, just about vulnerable narcissism, and kind of give my take on it or my spin on it to give you like an idea of what I'm seeing. If you guys are new here, my name is Ben Taylor. I'm a self-aware narcissist on this platform to provide awareness, growth, healing, and change. And do that on multiple different platforms, multiple different areas by dropping free nuggets of truth everywhere. You can look at it on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. Would love to be able to have you engage on any of those platforms there. Just look me up under Raw Motivations. Also, while I am on podcast platforms as well, so we have Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, that all of them as well under Raw Motivations. Really quick, if you haven't had a chance, download the NARC app. Just type in NARC. It stands for Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Community. There's a lot of things going on there. There's courses, there's accountability, there's tracking your no contact, there's getting advice from other people, there's diving into different exercises, even meditation practices to be able to help you work through some of the things that you're going through and to provide clarity from the craziness. But anyways, take a look at that. We've got monthly coaching, weekly lives, a whole lot of stuff that's packed inside that app, and a lot more to come. Download today for me the NARC app. Just type in NARC, Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Community, NARC, in Apple Store or Google Play. Anyways, diving in, vulnerable narcissists. So there's a lot of thought and there's a lot of theory that's happening, like even as we speak, about covert being now labeled vulnerable and like a bunch of different stuff. So I'm not diving into a bunch of like the newer stuff that I don't know a lot about. I'm diving into more of like what people have talked about and described a lot of times of being a vulnerable narcissist. So stick with me. We've got 6 things we're going to talk through today. Number 1 is a lot of times you'll see more of an introverted aspect of it. So this could be more of like a shy, the vulnerable aspect, but more of a shy and more of kind of like a pulled away. Almost like an aspect that they don't want to be the center of attention. They don't want to be the main person out there. This is the person that is not going to get involved with, big events, big things. Is not going to get involved in being like the center of attention. But a lot of times you'll see they'll still be partly center of attention. It's really interesting how it works. But typically with that personality aspect, you'll be more introverted, more shy, more something that's going to kind of pull back and not be the grandiose, like in your face, but more shy, more pulled back. A lot of times these people will come across as needing more time alone. Like they disengage from, parties, from people. They end up just doing their own thing. Sometimes they can come across like really unapproachable or maybe like cold. Oftentimes, like even in like a workplace environment, they'll be like unassertive, kind of like sitting back, kind of like gauging things. And oftentimes like people wonder like, maybe they're just better alone. Okay. The thing is, even with the introverted aspect, cannot say that today. So even with that, there's an aspect that they still think they're better than others. It's just not shown the same way. Just like with covert, just like with grandiose, like I think I'm better than everyone, but I know that that's not acceptable and I don't want to show that, so I'm going to hide it. Okay. And the second one I want to point out is the neurotic personality. So a lot of times this brings out like random subsets of different things going on. Like this might be like high anxiety or different like panic. It could be like depression. It could be different traits, different attributes. They're like even like paranoia, like things that you're like, wait a second, like what's actually going on? A lot of times with this, it still goes back to the aspect of the ego, because it's going underneath of like, what about my looks? How are people perceiving me? How are people, understanding like who I am? Like what is actually going on there? Like they're trying still to create that image. A lot of times they want to make sure they have, that superior status, but they don't want to be perceived that way. They don't want to look that way. It's more of that covert aspect of kind of like going underneath the surface, but you'll have random little subsets of like the anxiousness, panic, depression, paranoia, several other things like that that are just different, that are not normal of what you might see in a person with the rest of these traits. Number 3 is a lot of times they thrive on attention. But the thing is that attention oftentimes looks different. A lot of times it's like hidden. So it's not like attention of getting on stage and talking to thousands of people. It's more or less getting that attention through devious means a lot of times, or getting that attention through ways that everybody's paying attention, but it's not like they're putting themselves out there. Like they're the ones that are coming over to talk to them, or like they're the ones that are, seeking them out, and they don't want to cause drama, but a lot of times drama seems to follow them. So in how to be able to put this out into words, more like the idea of doing things that I know will get noticed. So like a narcissist, like I've used this example with covert. So like narcissist running across the street and helping the old lady take out her trash. That is something that the old lady notices. That's something that everybody else notices that's around, like the neighborhood. That's, what a boss might notice, with being in the workplace and doing something like that. Like doing things that are going to get noticed, but not in a flashy, like public, like, oh, look at me kind of a thing, but more of a subtle way. And then oftentimes when other people notice, then it's like, oh, like, I'm surprised you noticed. Like, oh, yes, like, and trying to put away like praise, and often it's like fake humility. Oftentimes to be able to get those compliments and be able to pump up that ego that they're trying to hide. It's kind of confusing. I know it's kind of weird. So like, for instance, just a little bit ago, whenever this was being recorded, a little bit ago, I passed 100K on TikTok. When I didn't post anything. I didn't put anything in like different like group chats that I'm in, anything like that. I didn't. And then I was kind of waiting of like, okay, like who's going to notice? Like that was even like the thought, in like self-aware mind of like, who's actually going to notice? Not in like a manipulative or like a bad way, but just who's going to notice? In an unhealed state, in a state of like, in all of that crap, it'd be like, hey, who's going to notice? And let me make sure I feed off of that. Let me make sure of like, oh my gosh, I didn't even notice. That kind of a thing would have been an easy way to go. Okay. Number 4, a split sense of self. So a lot of times when we talk about narcissism, we talk about shame, right? Shame is the underlying raging river that's underneath narcissism as a whole. And so with a vulnerable narcissist, you're going to have pride, you're going to have a negative like self-talk, and you're going to have shame all kind of like there. As a result, a lot of times you'll see a vulnerable narcissist be super sensitive, like extra sensitive to criticism. Oftentimes that criticism, might be something super small of like, hey, can you tweak this? Or hey, like this would be better. Or, hey, this would help me out if you could do this. And all of a sudden it blows up. Either the range, either the silent treatment, either subtle ways to be able to come back at you, but really sensitive to criticism. Like even more so, I think a lot of times than even just a regular narcissist or even a covert narcissist, but even like super sensitive to the smallest little bit of criticism. And then you're going to pay for the criticism you just gave. Number 5, blame others for mistakes. A lot of times you see this across the board with everything. Okay, but is always someone else's fault. I think the difference you see sometimes is with an overt narcissist, it's almost like never their fault and there's no way that they're going to take the blame. But I think sometimes what you see with vulnerable narcissists is taking the blame if it means that there's no other way out, and it means that taking this blame will help gain me traction in other aspects of life. So like for instance, like with my wife, like if I take blame of like, I'm going to take blame for something she just did because it positions me better to be like, well, yeah, but I've owned my mistake, so why are you complaining about this? Or I did this, so why are you doing, like, as a leverage, okay? Because a lot of times narcissists will apologize in order to manipulate a situation, so taking blame is also an aspect of that. Typically, it'll never happen. I think sometimes with vulnerable narcissists that you do see it happen, but it's very malicious in nature because it's, hey, there's no way out, so I'm going to do this to be able to position myself even better. You can run the whole humility gauntlet of like, oh my gosh, like he's so humble because he did all this. Or you can do it as far as like, hey, I owned up to this. So like, you shouldn't have a problem with me, doing X, Y, and Z now. Okay. And the other one is a lot of times they're going to withdraw a lot more than they invest. And this is true across the board with narcissists, but a lot of times you'll see it in the subtle aspects of the financial abuse, of like the small little things that keep you. Sometimes with like hoarding or like keeping hold of, lots of money, of like, hey, I'm gonna do everything in my power to make as much money, but I'm gonna live so that I don't spend anything, and so I don't give you anything, so I don't let my spouse, my kids have anything, like that kind of thing. Okay, like not paying for different things. I made a joke on a TikTok the other day of like, that's what narcissists do. They show up and they don't pay for stuff, because they want to be able to leverage other people. The idea is narcissists oftentimes will only invest in another person if they know they're going to get something out of it, if they know that it's going to benefit them. Hopefully that helped. That was a quick little rundown of just a couple things that I picked up and wanted to kind of highlight for you about vulnerable narcissists. Hope that helped. Leave some comments, questions below.